Good afternoon, everybody. This is Matt McQueenie of the Mix Minus Podcast. It is just before 3 p.m. on May 20th. I can't believe we're here already. I was looking at my statistics for my podcast, and in the little dashboard for the podcast host I use called Libsyn, which is a great podcast host. It's as seamless as using WordPress, if you know how to use that, but for podcasting. It's a really good service. But I saw in the panel where they talk about how many megs you've used for your episodes. I think I have about 400 megs available. And for me, one episode, about an hour of an episode, it will use 40, maybe 40 to 45 megs. And I was looking at the queue and I saw there that it was like 25 or something like that, which is a very small part of the pie. And I was like, oh, did the month turnover? And I looked at the statistics and I realized I'd only done one episode this month. The last one I did was about the French election, and thankfully Emmanuel Macron won. Obviously I was very fired up about the fact that a hack could be the thing that undid his chances, but he had such high chances. He was 20 to 25% polling above Marine Le Pen, and so that did not end up crushing the hopes or closing the divide and giving her the chance to win and continue this assault on liberal values, which, look, there might be many people who don't believe in liberal values or who fight them or think we're all microaggression babies or pansies or the other P word, but I think we want some stability, and we're seeing that right now in America specifically. I just wanted to talk about the fact today, as I do my second episode in May, I wanted to talk about the fact that I think I'm addicted to Donald Trump. And you could say, what do you mean you're addicted to Donald Trump? You say such negative things about him on all your podcasts and your tweets and your Facebook posts. And I think for myself, I was someone who majored in psychology, and for me that means I see right through Donald Trump. I think a lot of people see through him. He's a narcissistic, only looking out for himself person. He was able to play the showman. He was able to sell a vision of something to a large enough swath of the country who was struggling for them to buy in and say, he might not be the best person, but he's actually talking to us. And the other side is not even talking to us. The other side sounds like they're okay with leaving us behind or just winking at us and saying it'll all be okay. But we're living this way. I mean, we're in despair. We don't have jobs. We don't have very good health care. We are depressed. We are almost a third world country in the middle of a first world country. And so he was able to sell a vision that made them buy into it. And he's not done a lot to look out for them. Now, granted, we're only at about 125 days at this point. How crazy is that? Like 125 days. That feels like 125,000 days. There is so much action happening in this administration that it would just boggle the mind. I mean, I can't even keep up, but that's where we get back to the fact I'm kind of addicted to him. I can't get enough of news about what's going on inside baseball, inside the Oval Office, inside the communications staff, in the West Wing, all the machinations and all the backstabbing and front stabbing and turns of phrase, and this person says this, and then Donald Trump comes out and just says, no, that's not true. This is the reason. I mean, it's really scary, but there's an old saying in the media, if it bleeds, it leads. And this thing is bleeding out constantly. And so it's leading. And he wants a break. He doesn't want the media coming after him as hard as they are, but they're coming at him as hard as they are because it's bleeding. When things are bleeding out, it's not normal. We're not going to give him the chance when we start to have doubt in the way that he handles things. All of a sudden, we are going to give him the benefit of the doubt to learn on the job when it doesn't even look like he can learn on the job. A 70-year-old man who has acted a certain way, who no matter how big the Trump organization had gotten, it was not a big organization. He was the figurehead. He was at the top of the chain. And a lot of gut decisions he could make when you're in real estate are fine. A lot of negotiations can be zero sum. They could be, I win, you lose completely. And you can screw contractors, you can screw the little guys, and they're going to take it. It's not a big deal. But when you're in something like the government, when you're in something where compromise is the order of the day, where you can't have something where one side wins and the other loses. We're all in it together. There's too many balances happening across all of the aspects of government and country and state and town and federal and all. I mean, there's just too many things going on for gut feelings to be the order of the day. It can't happen. There needs to be stringent research, rationalizations. You need to plan things out 3, 6 months ahead, a year ahead, 3 years ahead. Here's where we want to be. And day to day is how Donald Trump lives. He doesn't want to look ahead. It doesn't make sense to him. He wants to be presented with decisions and be the decider, as George W. Bush said. This is what he wants to do. And it is because of this that things are amazingly alive in the media. When you think about the fact that Barack Obama, the president for 8 years, he was someone who came to office as the neophyte politician. He was the guy who all of our hopes were put into. He was going to change Washington. And it's hard to change Washington. I mean, like I said, the whole thing's too big. This whole country's too big. You can't change things. You can't turn an aircraft carrier 180 degrees right off the bat. You have to really move things a couple of degrees and then hope the next guy moves it, or the next lady, whoever that is, moves it a couple of degrees, and maybe the next side comes in and it's the opposition and they move it back a couple degrees. That's how it goes. You can't turn things around too fast. I mean, you can't turn things around if you run a McDonald's in town. Like as small as a governing platform can be, you can't turn things quickly. It just doesn't work. And when you're looking at something that's in as much control as the federal government, you can, especially. You're lucky if you get a quarter of a degree moved in 8 years or 4 years. It just doesn't happen like that. But for Barack Obama, we went 8 years. And you didn't need to check in every day. You didn't need to read every newspaper article about what was happening or watch every cable news show. It was no drama Obama, as they said. There wasn't a lot of action, but I like that. I like government receding to the background. And then you have your big games, you have your Super Bowls, you have your, figuratively speaking, you have your healthcare overhaul, you have the big moments where he's trying to push something through Congress or work with Congress to push something through. And so he'll hit the road, he'll give speeches. You'll then read on the finer details of whatever the policy positions that are being put out there are. And at that point, you start to make decisions. You start to, with a long game, be able to talk to your congressional advocates and your congressmen and congresswomen. You can go to town halls, and it's a nice, slow bake. And at the end of the day, I mean, everyone talks about how Obamacare was pushed through so fast, and that was like 12 to 15 months at the end of the day. So you need these things to be on a much slower cook than they are. And so with Barack Obama, you'd go weeks, you'd go months without really having huge news that would happen. There would be manufactured crisis at times. You know, the opposition would come up with things that were that would make what he did look disgusting, or how un-American, or this is just another person who isn't looking out for us. Fine, but on the whole, it wasn't like this thing that takes over your whole being almost every day. And that's nice, because then we can get on with living our lives. We can trust that the infrastructure is in place and is moving at a glacial pace that allows us to live our lives, that allows us to enjoy sports, enjoy entertainment, without feeling like we have to keep our eye on the overseers who are in charge of our country. Now I feel like every day, and I say I'm addicted because when you're addicted to something, it's amazing the first time you get the hit. In this case, Donald Trump, I remember almost feeling like I was punched in the face when he won on that election night. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I was afraid the next morning when I woke up that we would be in a different country, that we would have a harsher tone in our everyday dealings, that bullyism would prevail, and that things would just change. Now, granted, things have not changed in the everyday, which is both a blessing and a curse. I still continue to read and watch everything on what's going on. And so when I go out there on Facebook, or when I engage in conversation with people, I probably sound a little extreme because I'm really into it. I'm really following what's going on. And I think a lot of people, they just move on with their lives, which is fine. I'm not saying that's a negative. It's kind of like the people who watch the Super Bowl, who check in with football maybe at the big moments in the year, but they're not following the draft. They're not following the previews on the season and and who the next big player is, and week to week, listening every day to sports radio and reading magazines and articles and just staying so up to date with it, which is kind of how I feel like I am with a lot of current events and government stuff. They really jump in, maybe in the playoffs, maybe if their team is making a run, sort of like the way I am, for instance, with the New Jersey Devils in the NHL. I do not watch the NHL. A lot of people in our country don't watch the NHL at the larger numbers. They have a very tight-knit, intense fan base, very intense as any fan bases you can have, but they're small when you think of the whole pie of sports watchers. But when the New Jersey Devils make a run, and they had many runs in the 90s and 2000s, most recently I think 2012 when they went to the Stanley Cup and lost to the LA Kings. But when they make a run, I all of a sudden start watching every game, and I'm really in deep on it, and all the rules come back to me. I start to learn who the big players are. Of course, Martin Brodeur was still there, but you really get into it, and you can't wait for the next game. You can't wait. But then when it's over, you kind of get back off the train, and then when the next season starts, you're not locked in watching it. And if they don't make it to the playoffs the next year, or even if they do and go out and around, you didn't have the snowball effect building up to get back into that team. And I think just like that in football, for instance, you get to the Super Bowl, everyone's watching the Super Bowl. Everyone's got their opinions on the main event and the people and the halftime shows and who's doing the Star Spangled Banner, and everyone has everyone passes their judgment as Monday morning quarterback people on like how Cam Newton did or what a failure he is, forgetting that he had an MVP season, but everything in that moment is all that matters because there's so many eyeballs on it. Now, there's a lot of eyeballs on the NFL otherwise, but like we're talking 120, 130 million people. Or I guess eyeballs, that would be like 300 million eyeballs. So it's an intense amount. Everyone's got their opinions. And then when it's over, they move on. They really forget the storylines. They go on with their life. And I kind of feel that's like what's happened, or it tends to happen in politics. The presidential election is the Super Bowl, and it only happens every 4 years. And we all make our decisions and we all make our opinions leading up to it. Who's the most fit to serve? Who's the best advocate for our positions? Who is on the side of the politics that we've always run, whether we're Democrats or Republicans? And so I think what happened is you had this catharsis on election night where there was a huge swath of America who was so excited that Donald Trump made it. This guy who had nothing to do with government, this guy who, quote unquote, spoke truth to power, who was a little obscene at times while being nice, saying that, but he was somebody who was just, who was like us, but he wasn't, because he's really, I mean, he's a several billionaire, at least. He'd probably get mad at me for saying that because he is really worth 10 billion, but he's probably worth 3 billion or so, which, hey, look, I'm not taking away. That's amazing to be that. But when you think about that and you think about all the little scandals he had, or big scandals, I should say, I'm being nice again saying that, all the things he said and people, and then it's actually gotten to the point where it makes me feel, oh my gosh, are all the people who are backing him and watching this every day and agreeing with the things he's saying and wearing the Make America Great Again hats, shirts, which are made in China, from what they say. But are all these people thinking these things deep down, or have they just found somebody, an avatar of their policies, and they're just owning the moment and getting into it? They're getting into that Super Bowl for that moment and riding with that team, riding with that athlete, following the narrative. But I'm like, man, is this what people are thinking deep down? It's kind of scary. But we've gotten back to the point now where we're in the off season, right? We're getting up to the regular season of the NFL after the Super Bowl. And a lot of people aren't watching. There's enough people watching. There's enough people paying attention. But are the grand majority of people watching anymore? Are they noticing the diminishment of what appears to be the presidential the presidential platform? I mean, it is scary day to day when you read this, what's going on. But with an addiction, you get that hit the first time, it knocks you on your ass, and then you need more of it. You need more of it, and you keep going to it, even though it's against your better judgment, even though it's detrimental to your very being. But I can't get enough of it. Every single day I'm waking up, I'm watching Morning Joe on MSNBC. I never watched Morning Joe before, ever. I thought it was boring. I thought it was kind of stodgy. I thought it was inside baseball, as they say. It was just not something that was exciting in any way to me. And when you're talking about something like the No Drama Obama, day to day, it's like they're covering things that are only moving the needle a little bit. There's nothing really to cover. It's not overwhelming information that's coming at you. So I never watched that. I would watch SportsCenter in the morning. I would still read my current events every day, but I was reading it in almost a way where I wasn't feeling affected by it. I would read it to stay up to pace on what was going on. But now I'm reading things and going, oh, this hurts. Oh, this is terrible. What the hell? Like, you're unsettled by the whole thing. But each morning, I can't wait to watch the first 15 to 20 minutes of Morning Joe. My son Liam will call him Morning Joe. He'll say Mika. He knows all the people involved. He sees Trump. He says Trump. And it's amazing when you watch each day. You almost can't wait to get that fix to watch it. I can't, throughout the whole day, I feel like if I go 2 or 3 or 4 hours, if I'm at a business meeting or something, if I go that many hours without having access to internet or the news, you're afraid to open up your news apps or your phone and see the notifications coming through, and they are overwhelming. All the things that come out each day, it's as if it's the show 24, right? Where when you watch 24, you would say to yourself, there's no way this many things can happen in one day. There's no way. This is past the uncanny valley. There's no credence to this. It doesn't make any sense. But now we're living in something where it's literally like 24. And actually there's 2 shows that have it's amazing how ahead of the curve they were when you watch them. And they're and I'm talking Designated Survivor, the Kiefer Sutherland. We talk about 24, of course, but Kiefer Sutherland plays the president, and he becomes president because on the night of the president's speech to Congress, the State of the Union, there's, of course, the one cabinet member who's kept away from the Capitol called the Designated Survivor. And in that case, it was this guy. He was the head of Housing and Urban Development, I believe, in the show, the Kiefer Sutherland character. And what they do is, on the night of the State of the Union, you notice all the people in the crowd there. All of the heads of our government are there pretty much, when you're talking about the executive branch, the legislative branch, the Supreme Court, they're all there. So they keep the one person out in the case that if that thing is blown up, you have somebody who's left to keep continuity of government. And it's actually funny. I was reading an article in Time from a couple of weeks ago, hitting more on the fact that you just can't get enough of reading about Donald Trump. Time magazine had 3 of their correspondents spend the time from the end of Donald Trump's day as president, the end of his work day, into the evening time, into dinner. It was called Donald After Dark, I believe. And I don't read Time, so because I feel like it's just gotten a little down on its luck. It doesn't have the same import. But for Donald Trump, of course, he cares so much about being on the cover. So I read this because this looked really compelling. And Donald Trump is compelling. I do have to give him that. So what they do is they're following him from the Oval Office to the Executive Mansion. And again, no drama Obama. We had no idea really what the Executive Mansion looked like. Now I know completely what it looks like. Donald Trump allowed us in. He's allowed Sarah Palin. He's allowed Kid Rock. He's allowed Ted Nugent in. And they were, of course, in there taking the funny picture with Hillary Clinton. But we're in here. It's kind of amazing to be in the room there. But there was one funny anecdote in this story where Donald Trump is getting onto the elevator, I think to go 1 floor from the White House to the Executive Mansion. And he went into the elevator with the valet and the 3-time correspondents, and Mike Pence did not get on. And this is the insanity of continuity of government. Mike Pence could not get on because he had to take the stairs. In the very case that somebody were to blow up the elevator, there would still be continuity of government because Mike Pence would have been away from that elevator. Now I'm thinking to myself, how close are these stairs? Because you would think if there's a bomb big enough to blow up an elevator, it's pretty much going to blow everything up. But maybe it's just Donald Trump needing to show his dominance, and Mike Pence will walk, okay? Because we know Donald Trump doesn't take elevators. I read something where Donald Trump even says, this is how much I'm reading, like constantly Donald Trump. I know too much about him. But I was reading that he thinks exercise and physical activity takes years off your life, so he doesn't do it. That's why he just pretty much golfs, but he's on the golf court. He tries never to take stairs. He always takes elevators. He tries not to move as much as possible, I guess, to preserve his mummified soul. But in Designated Survivor, this happens, and so the Capitol is blown up. It's right in the first episode, right in the pilot. So if I'm spoiling, sorry, but it's the entire point of the show. So you're left now with this guy who was even going to be on the way out. He was apparently going to be fired, this Housing and Urban Development cabinet member played by Kiefer Sutherland. He was going to be fired. He was going to be let go. And now all of a sudden with this incendiary event, he's now the president. And it's fascinating to see this person assume the presidency, assume Secret Service protection, be living in the White House now, and be taking power of a government where there's really no one around. Now, Donald Trump's a little different, but in some ways, Donald Trump's a designated survivor. So you're watching this and seeing all these parallels. I would recommend the show. Network TV seems to be coming back a little bit. The other one is Homeland Season 6, the one that just passed. In this one, of course, a woman becomes president, and Homeland picks up in the transition between the election and the inauguration. And she is actually based in New York City, which was very akin to Donald Trump, being at Trump Tower there in New York City. And the whole story is about kind of this neophyte president and the security services trying to kind of commandeer her interests, right? So they're trying to tell her all the things that are actually happening, and they're trying to curry favor with her because the intelligence communities, we have no idea really what's going on in there. And when you become president, now you're basically in charge of them. So there's this just fascinating aspect to Homeland where it feels ahead of things, where there are these quasi-governmental, quasi-private sector organizations with people who create avatars in a basement of an office park, and they just create like hundreds of thousands of different Facebook profiles and Twitter profiles to help amplify messaging that is maybe right-wing, that's nationalistic, that tries to create narratives that are maybe not true. Very akin to what we saw with, or what's purported to have been seen with Russia, right? Where they were trying to turn the election through quote unquote soft power, through the power of social media and the internet and targeting and all that. I mean, those two shows, it's crazy the parallels when you watch them, how that went. Another funny thing from that Time magazine article with Donald Trump, my favorite part, I just loved reading this. It was like such a TikTok behind the scenes thing. So he sits down to eat with the correspondents, and Mike Pence is there as well. And I'm also fascinated that Donald Trump is living in the White House by himself, that his family's not even with him. So he's sort of a 70-year-old bachelor in the White House, in his own little prison, if you will. He really can't go anywhere when you become president. But Donald Trump is, they're sitting down to eat. And of course, the wait staff comes and gives him his Diet Coke with his ice. They give everyone else waters. Then chicken comes out, and Donald Trump only is given a special sauce to go with his chicken. But here's the kicker, my favorite part. Dessert comes out, and it's a chocolate cream pie. And Donald Trump gets it first. 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream. Everybody else gets 1 scoop. I mean, that's a psychologically fascinating aspect to that. But playing back to the idea where I talked about how you go from having a pretty full amount of freedom to now living in a White House in a sort of prison. I mean, you can't go somewhere. You're too important of an individual to get out, or to get out, you need to have such a Secret Service protection. You need to plan out days, weeks in advance, really, if you want to go somewhere. You can't be spontaneous anymore. Now, Donald Trump probably could not be as spontaneous as a normal human being could anyway, because he was so rich, and he really had his gilded castle there, the Trump Tower, where I assume he had many restaurants that he liked. That was where he accepted a lot of the people during the transition, where he famously had that dinner with Mitt Romney, where they ate like frog leg soup, which is, wow, that is, if there is not a rich person appetizer, I don't know what else is. I mean, frog leg soup. I mean, maybe it's great, but it's fascinating to me. But you go from this aspect where you have some freedom and spontaneity, and now you have none. And I always thought with Barack Obama that was really fascinating. That I think as early as 10 years before he became president, he was basically a college professor. So there are people who were being taught by Barack Obama, and then by the time they're 30, he's the president of the United States. I mean, that to me is fantastic. I mean, it's so crazy. And I think about the fact he grew up in his adult years in Chicago, spent all his time there, met his wife there, got married, raised his kids there, and then all of a sudden you become president and you can like not go back to Chicago again. You can't go back to the house you lived in. You really just can't go back there. He's obviously now living in Washington, D.C. until his one daughter, I think, finishes high school, and then he is rumored to move to Manhattan, which is kind of neat. Same in the Columbia area, I think, which is something that Dwight Eisenhower actually did as well. There was a time where in his post-presidency, I think he lived in one of the above one of the dormitories or something in Colombia, and he would just paint up there all the time. So Barack Obama might be in that area, but I can't get enough of this stuff. I cannot stop reading, and I think it's to the point where I said on Facebook today that the one dying industry that Donald Trump did save, because he kind of, in his campaign, he said he was going to save all these Rust Belt dying industries, right? He was going to bring back jobs, which is, you have to save dying industries really to bring back jobs there, because you're not going to do startups and all that stuff. So that's sort of what he means. But the one dying industry he really brought back was the newspaper industry. They are going unbelievably full speed ahead, going well. I mean, you think about the Washington Post, and they're all amazing. I can't stop reading these behind-the-scenes articles. There's amazing sourcing going on. There's amazing competition going on, especially between the New York Times and the Washington Post. Politico's doing a great job. The Atlantic, Wall Street Journal even, which is more conservative tinged, and they're doing a great job because you have to be in it to win it. A lot of these quote-unquote liberal mediums are killing it in the ratings. This tends to happen actually in presidential or presidencies, where the opposite side is where everyone goes to watch because they almost want to keep a certain level of bipartisan aspect in their viewing. Like if one side's in control, they want to watch the other to make sure that there's a check on that power, that they're getting the full story of the opposition. And by having the one president in place and then having the opposition media, you feel like you're getting some balanced perspective on what's going on. But this Trump bump is real, and it's for media. It's amazing. Coming from a media mogul, basically, someone who made his millions really in the last 15 years of his life in media, from The Apprentice. I mean, he was rich beforehand, but I'm saying his most recent iteration of being rich came from media. But you got Washington Post. I think they added 60 new reporters right before the start of the new year. You got the Wall Street Journal, who reportedly added 300,000 subscriptions in the last year. You have the New York Times, who in the first quarter of 27 apparently added 300,000 subscriptions. I mean, it's amazing. It is boom times for the media. And a lot of the media's push is ostensibly trying to get Donald Trump impeached in some ways or get rid of him. But I keep wondering, is that really their best thing? Because if Donald Trump is out, do all those subscriptions stay? Was this Trump wave something that brought in all these people to reading these outlets, and will they stay now? Or will there be a regression back from this high point of these subscriptions if Donald Trump's out? If you have Mike Pence in control, he is a much more a much slower burning president. There's not going to be these crazy news outlets. He's not going to be tweeting like crazy. His tweets are going to be set up weeks in advance. He's going to be quiet. He's going to recede into the background. He will still have a lot of things that I don't agree with as a liberal, quote unquote, liberal person, but it's going to be something that will not be as newsworthy on a day-to-day basis. It won't bleed and lead every single day. It'll get quiet. You'll still have your big moments where there's policy, and those will be things. But right now, the rate at which people are consuming media is just outlandish. I mean, I'm subscribed to so many things now that I have a fear of not being able to finish them. And that's something that always drives me nuts. I always feel like if I subscribe to something, I need to be able to finish it, especially if it's a magazine, a weekly or a monthly. The newspaper's a little different, especially digitally, because it's almost impossible to finish a whole newspaper or all the daily news, and they're always updating and the chronology is changing. So you feel when you're reading a newspaper that it's okay to maybe get 10 stories or 12 stories in a day and you're fine. But it's funny how I have this fear of, well, it's not a fear, but I have this thing about needing to finish it because I'm paying for it. But yet when I have Netflix or Amazon, I can go a month or 2 months without even checking into my Netflix queue, and I'm paying $10 a month for that. So you could go $20-$30 before you're even watching something. But with these mediums, I'm just like, I am locked in. I got the Washington Post subscribed to, and I don't read a lot of these outlets through the apps, through the Washington Post app or the New York Times app. I am continually using the app Nuzzle. This app is so amazing, and what it does is it makes a beautiful news queue, very nicely stylized, aesthetically pleasing, and it gives you a news queue. And what it does is it taps into your Twitter feed mostly. I think you can tap into your Facebook as well. But Facebook has gotten much less political and much less newsworthy and more personal, I feel like, these days. But Twitter is the one that is alive. It is the fire hose of news, both from Donald Trump and from the media who is reacting and keeping him in check. And so what Nuzzle does is it takes, it algorithmically looks at all the people you follow and puts all the stories in the app based on how many people are sharing them or talking about them and interacting with them. And so you can go there and know right off the bat, what are the things I have to read on New York Times? What are the things I have to read on the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Politico? What are the breaking news items? But they're breaking news, but almost with long form reporting. Again, like I said, dozens of sources. Sometimes there's 2 to 4 people writing these articles. You know where to go. Sometimes when you open up the New York Times app, you open up the Washington Post, sure, you can see in their idea, their curated idea, what the most important story is by seeing what's at the top. But sometimes the most important story is the one everyone's reacting to, and you won't see that right in the main queue there. And you'll maybe feel bad that you're not getting to all the other stories. So Nuzzle, I just lock into that, and that's how I read my daily articles. And I'm subscribing to these places, even though I'm not using the apps and reading those. I'm primarily reading those because I want to back good journalism. And I do want deals, of course. I mean, I use my NYU email address so that I'm always seen as a student, so I could get student rates on all these outlets. I still think it's important to find a deal. So for the New York Post, I'm paying $7.50 a month, which is a 50% price on the typical digital subscription. So I do that and I feel good. The Washington Post, if you're an Amazon Prime subscriber, this is a great deal. Just search Amazon Prime or Washington Post subscription for Amazon Prime members. You will get 6 months free of the digital Washington Post. And then after that, you're only going to pay $4 a month. That's a great deal. So for about $11.50, I'm getting the Times and the Post. And of course, I get the 6 months free first on the Post. And it's amazing. And then a lot of the other outlets, you're able to just consume them without having to pay a subscription. But I've also subscribed to the New Yorker. I think that's a great magazine. I try to finish that each week. I think the New Yorker is important too, because while it's great to be up to date with the politics and the current events happening, and there always is 1 or 2 articles in every New Yorker that are hitting those crazy moments. But I think it's important to read about the art sometimes, to read about profiles of people who are not in your normal comfort zone or niche. It's important to, I feel like sometimes I'll come across an article and it'll be like an Ecuadorian artist. And I'm like, oh, there's no way that I want to read this. I'm not interested. But you commit to reading it because you commit to finishing that magazine each week. And I say to myself, if the New Yorker has chosen one of their top 4 features, because they have about 4 long features in each magazine, if they've committed one of those slots to this, it's going to be worthwhile. And then what you find is their ability to interweave current events into this profile, or for you to, if they thought it was important, it's going to be important. They've reported on this for 1, 2, 3, 6 months, sometimes 9 months, sometimes a year. It's going to be worth it because they decided it's going to be worth it. And by the time you finish it, you found it worthwhile. You learn something about yourself. You learn something new. You learn something that helps carry you through in the day and helps bring that piece of knowledge into the current events and gives you a more diversified view on things. So it's really good. And then the other one I've brought into is Harper's. Harper's is kind of the stepchild New Yorker. They've both been around since like the 1800s, and Harper's had kind of, I think, fallen on tough times. They've come back, but they're a monthly almost version of the New Yorker. And they're really good too. There's some liberal leanings there, but I enjoy really well reported things. I just think it's so important for things that have a slow cook. Just like I like my government to be more of a slow cook and stay in the background, I like when stories are being reported in the background, and then by the time you read them, there is no doubt that these things have been fact-checked to the hilt, that they are completely as true in the moment as you could possibly be, that there's not an outlet trying to clickbait you into believing something that's not true in order to get you to their site. I'm very attuned to this idea. I like to read the Breitbarts of the world, or the Fox Newses, to see how they're doing this. And it's amazing how people fall for this. They fall for the clickbait, which is just trying to get you in. Most people wouldn't read that Ecuadorian artist, I don't even know if this is true, profile, because at the face of it, it's not interesting. There's no clickbait to tell you why it's important. But being an adult, you read it and you will get stuff out of it. And it might not make you angry. It might not get you ready to run through a wall. But look, it's like a whiskey. It's like taking a nice drink, having a nice calm, learning something about yourself. It's like when you read a book and you feel that nice calming aspect. Even though you don't maybe know what you read, you can't think of 10 things you learned in that reading, in that period of reading. It just adds something to your intuition. It adds to the layers of your thinking and your biases and your psychology. It's just important. I don't know. But I've been thinking about that with Donald Trump. Is there going to be a time where if he's out, that all these media outlets, the boom times are over, the oil's finished? It's fascinating that they're fighting so hard, rightfully, because things happen every day that, I mean, it's insane. The fact that there are dozens of people basically leaking to news outlets mean that those people who are aligned with him in his administration don't agree with what he's doing or think he's just off his rocker doing them. So that does happen. But will it drop? It's kind of funny when I get back to the Barack Obama versus Donald Trump thing. Barack Obama is kind of like, even though he's the younger guy, he's the hipper guy, even though he's not, we've seen him in his dad jeans and dad bod, all that funny stuff, but he's kind of to me like the San Antonio Spurs. Excellence is assumed, and you almost become uninterested on the daily basis stuff. You become uninterested on a day-to-day aspect. But then because you're just assuming they're going to have excellence, they're going to get 55, 60, 65 wins each year. They're going to be somewhere in that range. I mean, the Spurs are 22, 23 years of making the playoffs and basically having 50-win seasons. It becomes assumed. So unless you're an actual deep fan of that team or involved with that team on a day-to-day basis, you're not really watching them day to day, but you watch them when the big moments come, when the playoffs come. You know who the main players are, and Tim Duncan sort of is very Barack Obama-like. They're a little nerdy. They're a little, thinking men, and they sort of dress the same. They have, they're kind of, they're sort of black, right? Even though Barack Obama's got some different mixes, and Tim Duncan's from the Virgin Islands, but they're very similar. They dress kind of funnily similar, but you get used to the fact that they're going to get to the playoffs, and that's when you lock in on that Spurs team each year. When they get to that conference final, when they maybe get towards a game 6 and 7 in the earlier rounds, and that's when you find out what's for real. I mean, when you see them playing the Miami Heat, those two great back-to-back finals years, they lost in game 7 and they had the chance in game 6 to win in the first one. And so it was great. So you had everything you needed to know about the Spurs in that moment. Just like when the healthcare came to the vote and won. You knew everything you needed to know about Obama and healthcare in that moment. And then you don't need to come back in day after day after day because he's not doing a lot of interesting stuff, which is the point. You want your CEO, you want your leader to be calm, cool, and collected, almost like what they say, Spock-like. You just want it to be in the background. I don't want something making me look every single day when government is supposed to be in the background. Spurs are like that, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy. Donald Trump is kind of like the New York Knicks or the Los Angeles Lakers. There's so much dysfunction in management. There's family animus. Everything is out there to be consumed. There's leaks everywhere. It's messy. And on a day-to-day basis, you want to read about those two teams every single day in the regular season. Come the playoffs, they're not going to be there, and they're not going to be as interesting because the teams built on excellence are now the stories. So in the season, you're getting all the news clippings, and they're negative news clippings most of the point. You have Derrick Rose just randomly missing a game and not picking up the phone, and then all of a sudden saying, I had to see my kid, or you're not sure why he did what he did. A lot of dysfunction. Family owned, right? You look at the Buss family with the Lakers. You look at the Dolans with the Knicks. Very similar. Donald Trump is kind of the Knicks. Barack Obama was kind of the San Antonio Spurs. But I think with Donald Trump, the reason we have to read every single day, or some sub-segment of us who have to. Others will check in each day. Maybe they'll put Fox News on for a little bit, watch some of it with their dinner or whatever. But for me, I'm reading everything each day. I'm staying on top of it because a part of me feels like if I'm on top of what is going on, that I can somehow contain it and or I can react with intensity immediately so it's known that this is out of hand, that this is not right. Right? I mean, you're almost watching it as a hedge against craziness. Like if you stop watching it, he can go forward with these things because nobody's raising cackles or alerts about it. So it kind of gets there, but then you also get into a weird, I've almost called it like post-traumatic post-traumatic stress syndrome. Like you're constantly on edge. He's going to do something, but yet you're waiting for him to do something so you can get on edge. I mean, it's out of control. I'm not as interested though I'm not as interested in a lot of things I was, from getting guests in podcasting to watching every sporting event, to watching my Mets in baseball, to watching the NBA playoffs. And I've almost thought, I wonder, is that because the NBA playoffs is too preordained, kind of like a political campaign is, right? You have your one presumptive Democratic nominee, you have your one presumptive Republican nominee. In this case, it's the Golden State Warriors, it's the Cleveland Cavaliers. So am I just not as interested and more interested in Trump because subconsciously there's not enough there? There's not enough conflict there in the NBA playoffs until we get to the finals? I don't know, but it does feel a little politically motivated. Everything is in those two teams. And when you watch the rest of the playoffs, when you watch an Eastern Conference Finals right now, where the Cavaliers they're basically up 247 to 190, I think, across the first two games on the Celtics, where they're up 50 points in a game 2 on the Celtics home court, who had home court advantage. I mean, this is insane. It's out of control. And then you look at the Warriors. They did have a little bit of a scare in game 1 until Kawhi Leonard got hurt. And now Kawhi Leonard's going to be out for game 3. So sort of like the Republican race, like not only did Trump kind of take it, but the others hobbled along and didn't look as formidable as we might have once thought. The both of these things could be sweeps, and the Cavs really should sweep their way all the way to the finals. And then you're looking at something where they went 12-0, 12-0 in a Eastern Conference playoffs. There was no resistance at any step. Interestingly enough, the most resistance they got was in the first round against the Pacers, because Paul George is a legit player, and he really gets he's somebody who can go toe-to-toe to a degree. He's going to lose, but he can go toe-to-toe with LeBron. You look at the Warriors, it's very possible they're going to go 12-0. What the hell? 12-0 on both sides of the two teams playing in the finals? And it makes you wonder, I don't even know how to prognosticate the finals in that case. They're both so dominant that how do you have any idea what's going to happen even in game 1? And it's funny. It's got me thinking, this will never happen ever. It will never happen. It's the stupidest idea ever. But I'm like, man, things have gotten so extreme with this NBA. When you look at the fact there's going to be a third straight year of the same two teams playing in the finals. And it almost doesn't feel like 3 years, but it is, it's great. It's amazing when you get there, but the run up to it is almost preordained and ho-hum and not as interesting. Who cares about watching game 50? Who cares about the 42nd triple-double of Russell Westbrook's season, or the 55th win of the Houston Rockets season when it's all preordained, when they don't even matter? They're going to fall off anyway. But I was thinking it would be in these kind of periods where where the balance is so shifted towards the two teams, there should almost be like an NCAA football type bowl season. The new one, not the old BCS, but the new one where you have the 4 teams who are playing for the national championship playoff. And in that case, I would say the 4 teams are, even though things have broken a little funny, but with all injuries not in play, right? I would think the 4 teams this year would have been obviously the Warriors, the Cavs, the Spurs, and the Rockets. And so my idea was you would have 2 7-game series. The Spurs would play the Cavaliers, and the Rockets would play the Warriors. Those two teams, obviously, those two matchups are 7 games, which then lead you to the finals of the winners of those 2 series. And then in that case, it wipes away the whole senioritis thing with the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers can play a whole season, and they could have had 45 wins and it wouldn't matter. What's the point as they're living day by day in their regular season when they know they can wipe the floor with the Eastern Conference? Why play in game 60 hard? Why? But if you need to play and win a certain amount of games, even though in my little formulation they wouldn't be in because they didn't have a better record than the Celtics, but they would have had a better record than the Celtics if they knew that to get into that 14 playoff, they had to have the best record. And so you wouldn't have had this senioritis where for basically 1 or 2 months they looked like a lottery team. They were awful. They were uninspired and they didn't care. And I totally understand why they didn't, because they knew that the competition was that much below them. And so if you lose a game, who cares? We're going to be able to turn it on anyway, and we'll go on a 12-0 stretch and we'll show people what we're worth. But if you have that 14 playoff, they're not going to have these senioritis moments. And those losses are really embarrassing because they could be the difference between them playing in the 14 playoff or, like I'm saying now, outside of the 14 playoff, you have almost these bowls, right? These 7-game bowl series. So maybe you have Oklahoma City playing Milwaukee for some banner, right? This way, all the rest of the league has something to play for. They're going to be able to put something up in their arena if they win that one series, that one playoff series. So if Oklahoma City plays Milwaukee, or we allow Boston to play Washington, because that was a highly competitive series. I mean, the problem with that Boston-Washington series now is that now that Boston's getting wiped off the floor by Cleveland, that series doesn't feel that important. All of the sweat poured out in that series, all of the storylines, all of the conflict, it doesn't matter because winter is coming. You're going to get destroyed by the people coming down from the wall. I mean, it's over for them. And so in that moment, at least, if Boston plays Washington and at the end of that series, the end of that 7-game series, the winner gets some kind of trophy, some kind of banner to put up with their fans, it adds a coda to that season, that very good season where the Celtics were the little engine that got to 52 wins, 53 wins. I don't know how they did it, but they got there. They did an unbelievable job playing above the sum of their parts, being coached by Brad Stevens in a way that very few teams can be coached. I mean, they were they're almost a college type team with this amazing alchemy of players coming together, these spare part players. I mean, it's fantastic, but now it's going to feel empty when they get swept out of this series and they lose by an average of 30 points a game. It's going to feel completely and utterly empty. Nothing's going to matter that happened in series 1 or 2. And it's not going to matter they overcame the adversity of losing the first 2 games of the first series to the Bulls and then coming all the way back, winning the final 4, then having that amazing 7-game series against Washington. I mean, none of it's going to matter. And they will get the number 1 pick. But I don't even know if Markelle Fultz, for instance, comes on this team. What does that matter against LeBron James? I know you're playing the long game. You're playing for 5 years down the road with someone like that. But it feels like a loss every year when you lose. If you don't win a championship right now, it's all or nothing in the NBA. You are nothing if you are not winning a championship. Everybody goes back to the drawing board. Teams upend their rosters, which are highly competitive rosters. Anyone who gets 50, 55 wins, they're highly competitive. That's a really good season. You're 20 games over 500. That is a really good season that had many wins in it, that had many winning streaks, that had many big moments, that had the home crowd leaving the game feeling like you're on cloud 9 when your team wins a big game. There were so many moments, and it all doesn't matter because you lose the war, which is the championship. So I think with this 4-game playoff, those top 4 teams are playing for the ultimate championship. But then the rest of these series, or even like Bill Simmons says about having like a little, almost a winner out or or losing you're out type of almost a NCAA tournament type thing for the rest of the teams to play up to those series. But in this case, I think it would be so neat, and there could be that. You could have, outside of the top 4, the rest of the teams, the other 12 teams, play some kind of round robin type of tournament where the ultimate team has some kind of lower level banner. But I like the idea of the 7-game series where you can get into the moment and you can have something to play for, and you win, and you have something that is rewarded to your team for that season. It's not an Atlantic Division banner. It's not one of these banners that aren't going to mean a lot. It's some real meaning banner. It's not the championship, but it's something. It's some trophy between those two teams, maybe the Chowder Trophy or something if Boston wins. And you have something at the end of the season where you feel like you got something. You didn't lose out. You don't have to come out of the season and be like, oh my God, we're not even close. Let's upend the whole thing. Because upending the whole thing is not the answer either. If you have a team that can win 53 games, that's a lot of happiness for the fans during the whole season. That's a lot of happiness and intense moments in a playoff series. And you don't want to upend that because you're not LeBron James or you're not Steph Curry or you're not a loaded deck where Kevin Durant gets added to the Golden State Warriors, to a team that already has Klay Thompson and Stephen Curry and Draymond Green, and just, it's unfair, even though 3 of those guys were not top picks by any stretch. I mean, Steph was up there, Klay was up there, but they weren't like the number 1 pick, kind of like Kevin Durant was being the number 2 pick, or LeBron James was the number 1 pick. I mean, there's some guys who come in number 1 and they assert their alpha dominance the whole time. But I hate the idea that teams are left with nothing. I hate that a 53-win team walks away feeling like complete losers because they're not the best. How about we have a series where teams win something at the end? and they know they're only playing for that one series, but they either get something or they're out, and they don't feel like they're complete losers where they're just getting run over. I mean, I look at Toronto. Toronto went in all in. They gave all that money to DeMar DeRozan. They're going to think about giving all the money to Kyle Lowry at 31 years old. They brought in PJ Tucker, and they brought in Serge Ibaka, and those guys came in and they meant nothing. They were just another bunch of bodies on the front line in a league that's turning from big-bodied players to multi-dimensional 6'8" guys who can play every part of a position, or 6'5" centers in some ways, like Draymond Green, multifaceted. They're not big and dinosaur-like and stiff. Even though big guys were allowed to be stiff, they're not allowed to be stiff anymore. But God, what does Toronto do? You hate to be them right now. If they're playing for something in one series where they can put a banner up, they feel a little better about themselves. Two last things I want to talk about, technology-wise. Overcast is my favorite app. It is an app that it's a podcast playing app, or a podcast player. A lot of people will use the Apple podcast player, the purple one, but and that's fine. That's a good one. I've always tried to use third-party apps because I feel like Apple has missed their opportunity with being the leader in the field. People listen to podcasts 5-1 on Apple, at least in the most recent stuff I've seen. Google has come out in their Google Play Music with a podcast directory in it. There are some podcast apps that are good there, but podcasts really are an Apple-centric type of medium. It shouldn't be that way. Things need to open up, but I don't know what it is about Apple that makes people on those Apple devices, they're really podcast consumers. But Overcast is the best app, in my opinion, on the Apple platform, on the iOS platform. What Overcast does, and it is created by the guy who created Instapaper, and Instapaper was an earlier version of what many people might have in Pocket, which is a save content or a save later app. So anytime you see a piece of content on the web you like and you don't have time to read it, you hit this little button in the browser, or you send it to an email address, or there's an extension in a lot of iOS devices where you can save it to Pocket, and it puts it into Pocket in your little queue, and it gives you an unimpeded reading experience where you just have the text, no ads, no HTML. It's just a pretty reading experience, fills the screen. You can see the web version as well, but most people won't. Really good app, and Instapaper was the first one there. So it was made by a guy named Marco Arment. Marco Arment, then, who's a huge podcasting presence, he has all these shows he does, and he really believes in the platform and thinks about it like a podcast producer and listener. He came out with this app called Overcast, and what it does is it gives you two amazing features. Now, over the years, those have been paid features. They've been pulled back to be free features. There's some subscription models you can, but they are the reason you get the app. And what they do is they're called Smart Boost and Smart Speed. So Smart Boost, you press the button and it equalizes all podcasts. So if you have a podcast that has low output that you listen to, you hit that button and it sounds like the output of a professional podcast. The sound is at an equalized high level. It's great. It kind of makes them all sound just as good as each other. So the post-production or the sound is really never an issue. The really big one is called Smart Speed. We live in a world where there's so much content coming out at us. There's so many things to consume. We need to cut time where we can. And I don't like to be someone who listens to podcasts at 1.25 or 1.5 or 2 times speed. I think they sound like chipmunks. It's not an enjoyable experience. It's just not that cool. It's funny. I just heard Nuno Damasio, one of my better guests I've had. He started his own podcast and he had David Stern on it on his first one. Smart Speed will cut. I'm going to get to why that I said that, but Smart Speed will cut down the silences between when people are talking to the point where you could gain 6 to 8 to up to 12 minutes an hour in time just by cutting those silences between people talking. It's an amazing innovation. I think when I look at my Overcast time saved, I've saved like 300 hours in all the listening I've done. I mean, it's fantastic. If you listen to one Joe Rogan episode, you could gain back 18 to 22 minutes in a 3-hour podcast, even more, on that episode without even noticing it. You don't notice the silences being gone. It's amazing. The Nuno Damasio episode, Nuno and Company it's called, and obviously having David Stern on was an amazing get. He had Stern come to his apartment, which was cool, but he had to put on an air conditioner in the background of his episode because it was like really hot when you get the equipment and you try to keep the sound down. But when you have an air conditioner in the back, there's no silence between the talking. The podcast app just hears things in the background, so it doesn't cut silence. And they both talk a little slower. David, because he's a little bit of an older guy at this point, a little more rationalized thinking man. And Nuno has a slower cadence to his talking. So with that one, I did put it to 1.5, and I didn't notice much of a difference in their conversation, cut a lot of it. But most of the time, I hate listening to things at speeds that are faster than 1. This app is great because it cuts the silence. Smart Speed is amazing. I love seeing that how much time I've saved on episodes over the time. It's only that much more time to plow back into listening to more episodes. 300 hours is like 300 extra podcast episodes you can listen to just based on Smart Speed. Love those apps. Because he's a guy who's always thinking, Marco Arment, the creator of Overcast, he had a watch app as well early on. Again, Overcast is only iOS, so he had a watch app. And with the watch app, you can control the podcasts on Overcast playing on your phone. That's kind of how it works. But the really holy grail with the watch is finding a way to send the media to the watch so you don't need to have your phone in play, right? Because if you're going to go for a run, I have a 5.5-inch phone. Even if you have a 4.7 or a smaller one, it sucks running with a phone, especially when you have a watch. And then for me, I have the AirPods. So I'm wireless. I want to go for a run, and I want to be able to do it without my phone being in my pocket, or to have the watch around my wrist and then have the phone with a band around my arm. You just start to look silly. That's going to be like the thing where we look back 20 years ago with the people with the funny like mushroom haircuts or the weird haircuts or the funny clothes. That's what we're going to look like in 20 years when we have some kind of internet that's like embedded in our body, that we have like things hooked around our arm, hooked around our wrist, hooked around this. We're going to look really silly. So that's something that would be good to have. Now, Apple Music, because Apple owns both platforms, you can send music to be stored on the watch. Now, the watch doesn't have a lot of storage space because it's a very small thing. But if you think the watch, it's almost an iPad or an iPod Nano, right? So why shouldn't it store things? So Overcast came out with this send to watch feature. So when you're in your queue with your podcasts, you can choose one of the options to send it to the watch, and it will live on the watch. And for me, having the AirPods, I can now go for a run. Now, I do have the first generation watch, so it doesn't have built-in GPS, which is a whole nother story unto itself. But if you have a newer watch, or if you're willing to go running out for 20 minutes with your phone so that it can get the right inputs, because if you have the Apple One, Series 1, you can go for a run and it uses the phone's GPS to get a baseline. And then after that 20 minutes, you can now go for runs and it'll use that baseline. It's not perfect, but it'll use that baseline as its GPS or as its cadence or your pace, right? With the newer watch, that has GPS in it. So ostensibly, you send an Overcast podcast to the watch, you have your AirPods, you got your GPS on the watch, you go for a run immediately. That to me is pretty cool. So they came out with that. I don't know why a lot of people haven't come out with that for other apps. Anything that's audio should be able to send to the watch. Now, it might be a sort of nascent technology with Apple, but I really hope they get better with that as you go ahead. I feel like Apple really missed the opportunity with their own podcast apps to not have this feature, where similar to the music, why don't they have it where you can send podcast episodes through their app right to the watch? It just feels like an early mover advantage, being the platform for both things. The other big announcement was Amazon Echo, one of my favorite pieces of technology over the last couple of years, along with AirPods. I love the AirPods with the Apple earphones. I've actually just ordered a second pair. I don't know why, but I ordered it because they'd been so backlogged, and I like to watch this episode called airpods.isitinstock.com or something. And I'm so interested to see what places actually have them. It's a real-time alert on the stocks of the Apple AirPods being in stores. So you'll see some from like Montreal, around the country, and then all of a sudden the other day I saw Verizon had it, Verizon Online. So I was like, I'm just going to buy it. Who knows? Maybe it's a good gift for someone, or maybe I can have two pairs. I'm a little intense like that, a little obsessive. But Amazon Echo is fantastic. Their new iteration is something called the Amazon Echo Show. So it's the Amazon Echo, which is a great call and response, Siri and a speaker, I would call it, but it's better than Siri. It has to be because it has no other command or it has no other controls really where you can manage it. And it's very good. It can hear you across a room. And what you basically do is you tell it to play certain things. It can hook in with many kinds of apps, Spotify, iHeartMusic. There's a whole host of them. And then Amazon has its own content services, which are really good. Amazon owns Audible, so you could tell it to play the audiobook you're listening to. Really good app. I understand the speaker version. It makes sense. So the Amazon Show is the Amazon Echo with a screen. So it's not a screen like a tablet where you can do a lot of manipulations on the screen, but it will show you, if you ask for a song, it'll show you the lyrics to that song. It'll show you meetings you have coming up if you ask it to show that. I think it'll show some light video stuff. It'll show some weather stuff. But the big thing is video conferencing. So it's sort of a landline where you can talk to different people who have Amazon Echo or Amazon Echo shows. So if two people have Amazon Echo shows, you can just say to yours, call my brother Mike. And it'll call Mike on the Amazon. If he's there, he can pick it up and all of a sudden you're talking to each other. It makes sense. The weird part for me is you don't move with it. It's a stationary object that sits somewhere. So it can sit in a kitchen. It can sit in a living room. For me, I put my Amazon Echoes, though, because they're audio devices, I put them in places where they're not really amazingly accessible to me. The Amazon Echo on my first floor is on the top of the fireplace mantle, so it's above my head, so I would never look on a video there. Down in my gym, it's over in the corner, so that would be weird, too, to take a call while you're in the gym. It's by my bed. I have a little Echo Dot, which is the smaller top of the muffin part of the Amazon Echo speaker. And then I have one at work, which is the rechargeable Amazon Echo, is it Tap? I think they're all these crazy names, which is great because the Amazon Echo Tap recently got an update where it has full Alexa capabilities where you can talk to it and then it'll answer. Before you had to hit a button to make Alexa come on. So now you can just talk to it. It's no different than an Amazon Echo, and it's cheaper and it's rechargeable. So it's a really good thing. So with the audio devices, you can actually tell it to call people who have the other devices as well, and you can talk to them through the Echoes. Anybody who has an Echo, you can call them and they can pick it up on their Echo and you can talk to each other through it. The video thing is weird to me though, because I feel like if you have it in your kitchen, like you're going to go video conference with someone and just stand there and look at them, it doesn't make sense. So there's not a lot to this that made sense. And it's like $40 or $50 more expensive than the audio version of the Echo. The one place I feel like it makes sense when I was really trying to think about it, how about at work? So where are you stationary for a long time in the day? At work. You're at your computer. I have a standing desk where I sit, but I'm always at my computer. So if you had an Amazon Echo show, like if a small company like ours with like 15 people, if they got an Amazon Echo show for every desktop station, now people could just say, call Matt. And then it video conferences me from someone in another office is calling me. We talk to each other real quick. It's off. It makes sense to me in that case because you're in work, you're stationary, you don't need to move around with it. But it's useful because if you have a reason to contact someone and you don't want to go over to their office or you just want to get a quick response, in our office we use a lot of instant messenger. We use something called Microsoft Link because we're Microsoft, or with their Skype purchase, they have like a Skype messaging service now, Skype for Business or something. So there's a lot of back and forth little stuff. But to me, that would be interesting where it's like you use the Echo Show, you're stationary at your desk, everyone else is stationary. If they don't want to walk to you, they just give you a little ring, you pick it up, you talk, you're off. So I think that makes some sense, but I wasn't sure if that was the next iteration I was looking for from the Echo. I'd love them to take the audio version to some next stage, and maybe they will. They've really done well with this device, but we'll see. It's kind of expensive though, if it doesn't have a lot of tablet type capabilities anyway. So that's that. A lot of discussion here, a lot of psychology. Thank you for being my therapist, friends. It's been fun, and I will talk to you later. Hopefully I'll get another episode in May.